And at 10, Hammerhead. Growing up, his father would berate him for speaking Italian in their Russian household and would beat the boy with a hammer when punishing him. So, you know, Father of the Year right there. I guess that's kind of how he got the name. In school, he would later lie and say that he was Italian, only for a bully named Rico to reveal his lie and then steal the hat he wore, showing the ugly scars on his head from frequent hammer blows. Rico and his girlfriend would be the kills that Hammerhead needed to join the mob though. Hammerhead convinced the mob that he was Italian, which was necessary since they didn't really accept inferior stock, as they would call it, and he eventually killed his father with a much bigger hammer than his father ever used on him. Poetic justice. When his head was shattered in a brawl though, Jonas Harrow discovered him in an alley and operated on him, replacing his broken skull with one made of steel, whereas some versions make this an adamantium head instead. He would later go on to get a full body robotic upgrade from Mr. Negative after being shot in the back of the head with a special bullet, which would have killed him. This is definitely some alpha energy.
Coming in at number 9, we have Crossbones. A genetically enhanced mercenary with a hazy past, Crossbones wandered the world as an independent gun for hire until finally catching the attention of the villainous Red Skull. With proficiency in most forms of weapon known to man and a particular liking for stiletto blade enhanced gauntlets, Crossbones doesn't really have an ulterior motive or dreams of world domination, but rather will do whatever grisly task a supervillain is willing to pay him for, such as the time at the end of Civil War where he took advantage of the chaos and seemingly assassinated Captain America. Whatever the nasty job, Crossbones is willing to do it, and that's what makes him such a dangerous villain.
And at 8, Silvermane. As a teacher, Silvio Manfredi joined a criminal organization known as the Magia. With his cunning and superior fighting skills, Manfredi rose to the top of the Magia's ranks. He later became the head of a family, which in mob terms just meant a group of loyal members, not actually like related or anything. By creating gang wars, he increased the power of the Manfredi family, and in the process he also increased the power of the Magia as a whole, which pleased his superiors, obviously, because more power, it's more power. Manfredi also married a woman named Catherine and fathered a son, but when he was middle-aged, his hair became white, which led to the nickname that he grew to accept, Silvermane. Crime fighters Cloak and Dagger decided to take down Silvermane because of his role in illegal drug trafficking in New York City. Dagger attacked Silvermane and nearly killed him using her powers. However, doctors saved Silvermane's life by transporting his brain, most of his head, and other vital organs into a robotic body that would then provide him with superhuman strength, which is nuts and exactly why we shouldn't try and put our brains in robots. I've been saying this since this list. Don't do it.
Number 7, joined Hydra. Kingpin ended up joining up with Hydra later on, even becoming one of its leaders. Or at least, so he thought. When it was revealed that higher up the chain, the Red Skull was also involved, Kingpin decided to break ties. Evil as he was, even he didn't want to be allied with the Red Skull. However, he still, for a time, was the one seemingly controlling Hydra behind the scenes, with Supreme Hydra, who unknowingly was actually his son, Richard, reporting to him. In fact, Richard had actually infiltrated Hydra while his father was in a permanent state of shock, almost comatose, and had set up everything for his dad to simply come along and take control. Too bad Red Skull was involved though. Kingpin's plan at the time was to overthrow the United States government, and he and Hydra, up until the Red Skull reveal, actually made for a pretty powerful alliance.
And at 6, Tombstone. Lonnie Lincoln was born and raised in Harlem, New York. He had a congenital disorder characterized by the complete absence of pigment in his skin, which made him an outcast among the children his age. He also had a problem with his vocal cords, making him speak in whispers. The only student who didn't ostracize Lincoln was aspiring reporter Joe Robinson, causing Lonnie to misconstrue this lack of hostility as a token of friendship. 8 years after their senior year, Tombstone had grown to become a mob enforcer in Philadelphia, where Robertson happened to work as a reporter. When Lincoln tried to kill crime boss Saulsy Montana, his employee witnessed the murder and contacted the newspaper where Robbie worked. Robbie was about to meet with Hipper when Tombstone killed him and arrived at their point of meeting, only to find Tombstone taunting him with the man's corpse. Tombstone let Robbie go though, just because they used to be friends, but later taunted him on the phone, prompting Robbie to flee with his wife back to New York, where he became an acclaimed reporter for the Daily Bugle. This dude is freaking messed up, and if you've seen him in like the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, That version's even freakier.
At number 5 is Bane. One of the toughest upbringings on this list, the New 52 Bane spends his childhood in prison, living out his own father's sentence in a setting that teaches him how to fight to stay alive. But beyond his original motivations, Bane has one of the highest strength levels on this whole list. Known to be able to lift 15 tons, Bane doesn't hesitate to make use of his industrial surroundings while taking on his opposition, often using concrete slabs and boulders as weapons and projectiles in battle. What's more though, Bane is often caught in the grips of a venom addiction, which empowers him even more when he's under the influence. This gives him that extra power boost that brings his strength to another tier that is often unattainable by most villainous standards, especially among fellow street level bad guys, because with Bane, it's not uncommon to see him crashing through a stone wall or shattering concrete floors, or one-shotting other villains like Poison Ivy and Man-Bat in his fits of rage.
And at 4, Kingpin. A crime boss is one thing. A crime boss that to the public is a well-respected philanthropist and businessman is something else. But this businessman is like 300 pounds of muscle. Wilson Fisk is an absolute madman who runs most of New York's and Las Vegas's criminal underworld. However, things get even more intense after his wife is killed, so he doesn't end up retiring, which he was actually going to do, but then they killed his wife. After the murder of his wife, not only did he resume leadership of his former organization, but he also turned over his files on other criminal leaders to the law through the costumed crime fighter of Daredevil. Kingpin actually helped Daredevil, except now this time he had the motive of ridding himself of any and all rivals. The ploy actually worked though, and as a result of the evidence in the files, many crime leaders both inside and outside the Magia were convicted. In the ensuing power vacuum, the Kingpin rebuilt his coalition stronger than ever before. He moved on to control a great majority of non-Magia East Coast gangs dealing in conventional crimes, and the Kingpin's organization became stronger than any single Magia family in the New York area.
Number 3, brutally kills Anatoly Ranskahov. In the Daredevil Netflix series, Anatoly Ranskahov is a leader of the Russian Mafia in New York. When he fails the Kingpin, unable to get the true name of Daredevil from night nurse Claire Temple, Kingpin decides he wants to have a word with Anatoly. Ranskahov comes forward himself, actually wishing to speak with Kingpin and kind of clear the air. But this is not the type of word Kingpin had in mind. Instead, Fisk begins to attack Ranskahov, and despite Ranskahov's own toughness, the man survived life in Russian prison after all, Fisk kills him using a car door to crush his head. The crazy part is throughout the scene we learn it is not Ranskahov's failure that has actually ignited Fisk's rage here, but the fact that he embarrassed Wilson in front of Vanessa while the two were on a date. This just goes to show how dangerous it is to upset Kingpin, as he has generally been shown as having a very violent streak and a sometimes off-the-wall temper. To relive this moment, you can return to the shocking end of episode 4 of season 1. The Daredevil series, at least in Canada by the way, is still on Netflix and available to stream. I was watching it earlier. It's great.
Penultimately, into number 2, The Hood. After seeing Electro fight Daredevil as a child, the life of a supervillain really enticed Parker Robbins. With a mother in need of constant medical care, he soon dropped out of high school to steal money to give her better care. His cousin John told him about some valuable material perfect to steal at a nearby warehouse, and together, they broke into it. They were about to leave when they were attacked by a demon in a cloak. Peter shot the being and assumed that he had killed it, but not wanting to leave empty-handed, he took the cloak and the boots. For some reason, I don't know why he thought you were gonna get any money for it, but whatever. On the way home, he was jumped for his shoes and used the boots to escape. And upon finding out that the boots actually gave him the ability to walk on air, he took the cloak over to John's apartment where he found out that the cloak gave him powers as well, originating from the demon Dormammu, though he didn't know it at the time. A dude with a cloak and boots giving him a fraction of the powers of Dormammu? Yeah, that's a number 2 for me. Pun intended now.
And coming in at our top spot, we've got to go with the classic Daredevil villain, Bullseye. An incredibly skilled assassin with nearly perfect accuracy, Bullseye ranks as one of the greatest villains that heroes like Spider-Man and Daredevil have ever had to face. Bullseye was responsible for the death of Elektra and appears to have zero regard for life or any sense of moral goodness, with even other members of the Dark Avengers being disgusted at his lust for murder when he was briefly a member of their team. While Bullseye often finds himself under the employ of characters such as the Kingpin or Norman Osborn, his rather unique powers and his complete lack of empathy make him potentially the most deadly street level villain of all.
At number 10
is Bullseye. Longtime villain to Daredevil, Bullseye has become one of the most powerful and unbeatable villains to be considered a street-level threat. His marksmanship gives him that extra fear factor since he prides himself on never missing, so whatever he's firing at you, you'd better hope it's not deadly because it's probably making contact one way or another. Bullseye is also credited, if that's the right word, with killing Elektra in the comics, leading to her very real and lengthy absence, that is until she returns as Daredevil. He's also killed Daredevil's lifelong lover, Karen Page, and the Daredevil himself at one point during the End of Days storyline. This is also a pretty shocking moment, especially given the method by which Bullseye does it. A stab right to the head isn't the way you expect a mainstream Marvel hero to go down, and at the hands of a street level bad guy too. At number 9 we have Harley Quinn. Harley is a relatively new comic book villain all things considered, but in her short time since her first appearance in Batman the Animated Series, she has made a huge splash. Originally the evil sidekick to the Joker, she has since branched off and made a name for herself as a pretty impressive street level villain. She's very cunning, but also shows some very impressive power at times, like when she beats down Nightwing, or even the time she takes out Wonder Woman single-handedly. At least for a time, and she does it with sleeping gas, but still, she takes her down. All in all, Harley Quinn has become such a popular and prevalent villain that her street level status has even been contested a few times. My guess is she will soon be given a huge power adjustment for the better and find her way to becoming a higher level villain than even the Joker himself. At number 8 we have the classic Green Goblin. This villain has always been one of Spider-Man's biggest nemesis, but still has always kept his integrity as a grassroots street level villain. Although Norman Osborn has become involved in plenty of bigger plots and missions that concern greater causes than street violence, his persona in Goblin mode is still very much a street level threat. And with his arsenal of goblin bombs and sleeping gas, he often packs a pretty significant punch at every encounter. But the worst of the Green Goblin's plots typically aim to inflict psychological torture on Peter Parker, which shows Osborn's resourcefulness, because street level villains only have so much to work with. In fact, I'd argue that Green Goblin is one of the most psychologically damaging villains on this whole list, often targeting family members and deep traumas that force Spider-Man and other targets of his into extremely uncomfortable positions and tough decisions.
Coming in at number 7, we have Boomerang. Originally hailing from Australia and given his identity as a stereotypical joke by an offshoot of Hydra, Boomerang has no actual superhuman abilities, just an incredibly gifted throwing arm that has been utilized over the years to throw more and more intricate high-tech boomerangs. Best known as a thorn in Spider-Man's side and one of the founding members of the superior foes of Spider-Man, Boomerang would eventually begin to have a change of heart after becoming Peter Parker's roommate and getting a bit too over his head with his relationship to the Kingpin. Nevertheless, Boomerang's incredible accuracy and the quality of his high-tech gadgets means that he's not a villain to underestimate.
At number 6 is Kraven the Hunter. As one of Spider-Man's oldest and most enduring villains, Kraven has had plenty of time to build up his resume as one of the most impressive street-level villains in comic book history. And I'd argue that Kraven is one of the most authentically street-level villains on the list, considering he devotes his life to tracking down and hunting superheroes with little more than some traps and handheld weaponry. But his biggest move of all is when he actually catches and kills Spider-Man during the events of Kraven's last hunt. Although the death only lasts so long, it does show that Kraven is actually capable of following through with even the most ambitious hunts on his list. And what's more, his manipulation abilities also shine through when he successfully dupes the masses into believing that he is the web slinger himself for a time, dashing Spider-Man's reputation and making his comeback that much more difficult.
Number 5, First Kill. As tragic as Wilson Fisk's origins are, the fact remains that he committed his first murder at a young age. In the 1998 Daredevil series, considered Volume 2 overall, in issue number 15, we get a look back on what Wilson Fisk's childhood was like. His parents struggle to make ends meet and are constantly arguing about the finances. Bills unpaid means that things are constantly turning off in the Fisk household. One such thing they end up losing is the heat, which results in Wilson's pet rat, Benjamin Franklin, freezing to death. At least, I think that's a rat. I wasn't sure if it was a rat or a mouse when I was looking at the comic, but I'm pretty sure it's a rat because of the tail. I'm no animal expert though, or rodent expert for that matter. Fisk becomes obsessed with money, and at one point is paid $15 to start a fire. When a maintenance man gets in the way of his plan, he becomes Wilson's first kill. That is how obsessive young Wilson has become at this point, and continues to be pretty much throughout his life. Pretty obsessive guy.
At number 4 is Dr. Octopus. Still considered a street-level bad guy, Doc Ock seems to be one of the most inventive and high-powered villains in that category. With his supercharged intellect, he is known to be on par with Tony Stark and even Reed Richards, and often applies his smarts to developing new technologies to help him succeed as a villain. Known as the founder of the Sinister Six, he's also got ties to the rest of the supervillain community and clearly has the ability to mobilize his villainous counterparts as though it's a second nature to him. But above all, his greatest feat that sort of puts the definition of street level into question is the time when he swaps Peter Parker's mind with his own while he's facing a terminal illness. This leads Doc Ock into a life of heroism as Spider-Man and ultimately kills the one and only Peter Parker in the process. That moment is almost on par with the time he held the whole world hostage as one of the most impressive feats that any street level villain has ever accomplished.
Coming in at number 3, we have Barracuda, the arch nemesis of the Punisher. An optimistic and smiling serial killer and gangster, the Barracuda is everything the Punisher stands against and more. Originally just hired by a larger criminal organization to assassinate Frank Castle, the Barracuda's rivalry with the Punisher became personal when their ensuing battle caused the Barracuda to lose both an eye and all the fingers on his right hand. The Barracuda might not have any superpowers himself, but his depravity and lust for violence are essentially unmatched, with multiple moments over the years that rank as some of Marvel's edgiest, such as snorting drugs off of a fresh human skull and engaging in literal cannibalism.
At number 2 is Kingpin. As one of the most well-connected villains on the list, Kingpin uses the streets to his advantage more than maybe any other villain on this list. Being a big brute with powerful strength and durability stats, he's pretty good on his own, but his real power comes from his social power and influence. He's got the ability to take down his enemies with a systematic approach the same way that a mob boss would in the real world. Except in this case, his cronies are often other superpowered beings who are willing to carry out his evil deeds for him. And if we're not counting social power as part of a villain's power set on a list about power, then we're not truly valuing every angle of the art of villainy, if you will. And although someone like Dr. Doom might have the monopoly on the cosmic level villain community, this is, after all, a list about the street level bad guys and how they make use of the limited resources they have access to on the streets of New York or Gotham. And there's just no arguing that Kingpin just simply has the streets under his thumb. Okay, at number 1 is the one and only, the man himself, Joker. I feel like I really shouldn't have to justify this entry because we all know that the Joker is one of the best villains, not just on the streets of Gotham, but of all time. And it's primarily due to this resourcefulness I mentioned in the previous entry that being a street level villain demands. The Joker is well aware that he has always needed to make more of an impact than Batman's superpowered villains, but without the superpowers. And the way that he typically does this is by resorting to psychological torment against his enemies, usually by bringing their family members and friends into the fold or by appealing to their greatest insecurities. And all in the name of a laugh, which just adds that extra level of intimidation to the whole effort. It's the Joker who paralyzes Commissioner Jim Gordon's daughter and takes all morale away from the good guys at that crucial moment. It's the Joker who beats Batman's second Robin, Jason Todd, to death, leaving Batman to find a new sidekick. And it's the Joker who tricks Superman into dropping a bomb on Metropolis and killing the love of his life, Lois Lane. He's never acting alone, but instead of enlisting other villains to help in his plots, he's often enlisting the heroes themselves, turning their own psyches on them, if not making their whole lives crumble around them before the battle can even start. There's no need to expound anymore because I can just go on, but when I knew I would be writing this list, there was no question that the Joker was gonna be in the number 1 spot.
Number 10 created his own crime business monopoly. In issue number 50 of The Amazing Spider-Man, which also coincidentally happens to be Kingpin's first appearance ever, Peter Parker decides to call it quits on being Spider-Man. As soon as Kingpin hears tell of this, he decides to take this opportunity to put his master plan into action. He's been aiming to make the world of crime crime a business since day one, and now is his golden opportunity. He gets together all the major players and they all almost unanimously agree to Kingpin taking charge of a new, fully organized and cohesive criminal empire. Well, except for the big man, who actually tries to return to the world of crime after leaving it and take charge of this new organization that Fisk basically just built. Doesn't go so great for him, as you can imagine. Unfortunately, before the end of the issue, Spider-Man has already returned, so this attempt was kinda short-lived, but it wouldn't stop Kingpin from trying to create a vast and efficient criminal empire in the future, all under his own leadership, of course. And at least it lasted for a few issues there. That attempt. Number 9. Attempted to silence the press. After bringing together his crime monopoly, Kingpin began a massive crime spree, which got the notice of the press. The Daily Bugle started to talk about who could be behind everything that was going on, and decided to cover it, because well, it was news. Kingpin, however, didn't like that they were alerting the public to what was going on, or having anyone poke their nose into his affairs. He kidnapped J. Jonah Jameson in response, and threatened him to stop reporting on the increase in crime, or else. Jameson refused to abide, stating he would not be pressured into having someone tell him what he could or couldn't print in his paper. And fortunately, Spider-Man did end up arriving, and while initially getting beaten, would later save the day. Although that's not quite how Jameson, of course, would remember it. He's like, Spider-Man threatened me. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are enjoying this list and you want more lists on Kingpin, because Kingpin is awesome and he deserves to be hyped, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Betrayed Don Rigoletto. The original Rigoletto. There is actually another Don Rigoletto who succeeded the original. He too, however, was taken out by Kingpin. Wilson Fisk used to be the bodyguard, enforcer, and kinda general right-hand man to Don Rigoletto initially in the comics. However, getting in good with Don was all part of Wilson's elaborate plot to take control of the city. He had been building connections for years, waiting for this moment when he would take out his boss and replace him. Fisk killed Rigoletto in a moment of vulnerability, near the end of issue number 3 of Daredevil, The Man Without Fear. After a meeting, Don was complaining about the request that he'd had to move into more ludicrous areas of crime. At least, areas of crime he considered to be ludicrous. I think most of us would, actually. Fisk seems to respond by giving Don a temple massage to help ease his boss's stress. However, this doesn't last, as while Don is soothed momentarily and at peace, Fisk then decides to snap his neck. The moment also goes to show just how much Don trusted Wilson. Granted, Don Rigoletto was still a crime boss, but Wilson in a lot of ways was probably a worse replacement when it came to how much power he has managed to amass and how dangerously he wields that power.
At number 7 is Red Hood. After the events of Death in the Family, Red Hood sees his origin story come to a brutal fruition as he is forced to rebuild himself. And as he rebuilds, he solidifies a name for himself as one of the most powerful street-level villains out there. He travels the world, becoming adept in all the martial art forms like Aikido, ninjutsu, Krav Maga, and even capoeira, among others. His hand-to-hand combat skills lead him to defeating Ra's al Ghul in a fistfight at one point, which is a pretty impressive feat considering the villain is typically a tough match for even Batman himself. Another impressive angle for Red Hood is that he knows how heroes move and act, since he used to be one himself, and this allows him to be one step ahead of them at all times. All while keeping street-level status, he even goes back to heroism in his own twisted way when he steals the Batman mantle during Bruce Wayne's presumed death. But ultimately, his villainy seems to prevail at times, like when he kills over 80 men in a poisoning plot while escaping Arkham Asylum. His devilish, revenge-driven plots are always pushing the envelope, and his mysterious persona keeps him hidden in the shadows as he runs the Gotham Underground as a solo act.
Number 6. Put Aunt May in the ICU. While this one wasn't intentional, Kingpin did end up being the one responsible for almost killing Aunt May. Notably though, Aunt May seems to have some kind of immortality powers, at least when it comes to plots and scripts, as she didn't die here, nor has she ever really properly died anytime her life has been threatened or seemingly even snuffed out. Spider-Man had actually been Kingpin's target. This was after Spider-Man had revealed his true identity of Peter Parker to the world. This put a target on Peter's back, obviously, with Kingpin putting a hit on Spider-Man. However, the shooter who was aiming for Peter missed, and instead hit his Aunt May, who was with Peter at the time. Aunt May ended up on death's doorstep doorstep and very nearly died here. Meanwhile, Peter donned his black suit and searched for the one responsible. When he found out it was Fisk, he went to pay Kingpin a visit in prison in issue 542 of Amazing Spider-Man. Oh yeah, Kingpin did all of this from a prison cell, by the way. Peter beat him to within an inch of his life as a warning and declared that if May didn't make it, he would be back to finish the job. It was such an evil thing that it even made Spider-Man momentarily pretty evil.
Coming in at number 5, we have Typhoid Mary. A very powerful mutant with multiple personality disorder, Mary is capable of telekinesis, telepathy, and manipulating fire when under the influence of her more violent Typhoid and Bloody Mary personas. Her transformations between personalities are so intense that even Daredevil was not able to tell after encountering two personalities that they were the same person, despite his increased senses supposedly being immune to her trickery. Despite being a mutant, Mary has most often fought with both Daredevil and Spider-Man, giving these street-level heroes a headache as they try to deal with multiple violent women in one deadly body.
Number 4. Killed Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse was the nickname given to Maya Lopez's aka Echo's father. His real name was Willie Lincoln, and he ended up dying because of his connection to Kingpin. Initially, Wilson and Willie were best friends, thick as thieves, and Fisk appreciated Willie's off-the-wall nature. Wilson himself was a bit crazy when it came to his behavior at the time, and having Crazy Horse around helped him to feel, I guess, a little bit more sane by comparison. That is until Crazy Horse got a little too wild even for Wilson. Kingpin ordered Lincoln killed and then raised Maya as his ward. He sent her to all the best schools, seeing potential in her. You can imagine Maya's reaction when years later she realized that Wilson was the one responsible for taking her father from her. She attempted to kill Wilson, shooting him point blank in the head. Fisk would actually surprisingly survive this, though he would be left blind for a time as a result of that attack. I still can't believe that he survived it. Like, that's crazy.
Okay, at number 3 we have Jean-Paul Valley. Typically going by the name of Azrael, Jean-Paul Valley has a pretty powerful track record and seems to almost supersede the title of street level villain, but I would argue that he still is in that category and simply exists to show just how powerful a street level villain could get. Having been given a massive genetic enhancement at birth, Jean-Paul already has a 1-up on most of the other entries on this list, with a superhuman set of abilities like enhanced healing, senses, durability, speed, and of course, strength. But above all, he's got a reputation as one of the most intelligent villains with an advanced hand-to-hand combat and swordsmanship stat to boot, using his flaming sword as a weapon of choice in close combat and his projectile blades at distance. He's also got a win out as one of the coolest looking street level villains too, if you ask me.
Number 2. Killed Spider-Man. Sometimes people forget the Kingpin isn't just a Daredevil villain, he's a prominent Spider-Man villain as well. In fact, his first appearance wasn't in Daredevil, it was actually in an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, issue number 50 to be exact, which we actually talked about at the beginning of this list. So it didn't come as a surprise when he showed up as the main villain in the Spider-Man animated film Into the Spider-Verse, at least for fans that know this about him, I guess. What did come as a surprise though was that he actually succeeded in killing Spider-Man aka Peter Parker in the movie. Fortunately, at the same time, Spider-Man aka Miles Morales was just discovering his own spider powers and had a multiversal team of spider folks end up joining him in order to stop Wilson Fisk's evil plot. Still, Kingpin did kill Peter Parker in cold blood and then also tried to play it like he'd always thought of Spider-Man as a great hero and was friends with the guy, even throwing a banquet in Spider-Man's honor afterward and inviting love of his life, Mary Jane Watson, to it. Wow. Number 1. Completely ruined Daredevil's life. During the Born Again story arc, Daredevil's true identity as Matt Murdock ends up being used against him. Kingpin ends up acquiring this information, which was sold by Karen Page for drugs in Mexico, but finds its way to him in New York. Kingpin then attempts to ruin Matt Murdock and thereby Daredevil's life in every conceivable way. His house ends up being firebombed, and even his uniform is left in tatters. His accounts are frozen by the IRS. Fisk even tries to ruin his reputation as a lawyer by getting a police lieutenant to swear that he saw Murdock bribe a witness to commit an act of perjury while on the stand. Not only that, but he also threatens the life of Karen Page as well, almost killing her.